Night. The rails shine like wet thread in the floodlights. Steam drifts over a forest of cranes. And somewhere in that fog, a whistle screams, a single note that says, "Move, now." On flat cars sit machine tools wrapped in canvas, forge presses lashed with wire, crates stamped with factory numbers from Kharkov, Kiev, Leningrad, Minsk. Workers climb onto the cars, children in blankets, a foreman with a ledger in one hand and a tire iron in the other. The locomotive coughs once, twice, and pulls a city into the dark. This is how the story begins in the summer of 1941, with an order to move the beating heart of Soviet industry west to east, from the war's path to the Urals and beyond, faster than any army had ever moved it in history. On June 22, 1941, Germany invaded. Within 48 hours, the Soviet leadership creates the Council for Evacuation, an emergency body to decide what goes, where it goes, and who goes with it. The State Defense Committee, GKO, follows on June 30. Names enter the record. Nikolai Shvernik chairs the council. Anastas Mikoyan, Mikhail Pervukin, and a young Alexei Kosygin are assigned to turn chaos into logistics. Lazar Kaganovich's railways became the spine of the plan. What they authorize in those first days is not a plan in the calm sense, it is triage at the continental scale. The logic is brutal and simple. Remove what the enemy needs and what your own army must have. Priorities are drawn up in red pencil. Tank plants, aircraft engines, ball bearings, armor plate, explosives, and machine tools. The first lists specify entire enterprises by number, not just machines. Factory number 183 in Kharkov, the Kirov plant in Leningrad, Uralmash in Sverdlovsk, designated as a receiver. The rail map is annotated with new destinations: Sverdlovsk, Chelyabinsk, Nizhny Tagil, Magnitogorsk, Kirov, Kuybyshev, Omsk, and Novosibirsk. The words "to be relocated" appear beside hundreds of names. Then men and women start turning bolts. A lathe is bolted to a concrete floor. To lift it, the crew sledgehammers the floor away from the anchor bolts. Sparks fly. A crane swings in. Slings bite into oiled steel, and the lathe rises like a trapped animal. In another hall, a 200-ton hydraulic press is disassembled like a cathedral. Uprights, crown, ram, labeled with stencils so it can be resurrected in a field 1,000 miles away. The foundry roof glows at night. It has to be taken down, numbered, and shipped as well. Paper flows in rivers, shipping manifests, temporary assignments, evacuation orders for families with factory badges, wives, children, elderly parents, because labor is part of the cargo. The first trains carry the heaviest things. The second wave carries the precision, gauges, cutters, jig plates, and the measuring standards that make mass production possible. The third wave brings the souls of the factories: foremen, fitters, electricians, the woman in the gray coat who can grind a gear tooth to 7 microns by touch. These people travel standing, sitting, perched on crates in open gondolas, wrapped in tarpaulins that flap like flags in the wind. By July, Soviet frontline cities are emptying their industrial guts. In Kiev, crews work under bombardment. In Smolensk, a convoy pulls out as German advance guards cut telephone lines behind them. In Leningrad, the Kirov plant begins to split itself like a cell. One part stays to feed the city's defense. Another part, drawings, patterns, a cadre of specialists, goes to Chelyabinsk to merge with the tractor plant. There, a new word will be spoken with awe and exhaustion. Tankograd, Tank City. The numbers for 1941 are staggering and, in places, contested. Soviet reports at the time describe more than 1,500 large factories relocated east by year's end, with total wartime relocations above 2,000. Some accounts assert that in roughly 90 days, beginning in late summer, the railways shifted on the order of 10 million tons of equipment and supplies. Other historians caution that wartime reporting mixed confirmed tonnage with projections and emergency allocations. The exact figures vary by archive and definition, whether you count only machines and steel or also raw materials, food stocks, and personal baggage. What is not disputed is the scale and the speed. In 3 months, an industrial civilization moves. What did this look like on the ground? Nizhny Tagil, late October. It is cold enough to taste iron in the air. On the flats, under snow that squeaks like chalk, new foundations are chalked out with lime. A train from Kharkov hisses into the yard. Its cargo, the heart of factory number 183, the great T-34 line. The cars are opened, and the machines, planers, stamping presses, line shafts, are set directly onto mud and timber. Teams run steam hoses from boiler cars to thaw frozen bolts. The first assembly line is laid not inside a building, but across a rectangle of frozen earth strung with lamps. A foreman tells his crew to keep the crankcase molds warm with burning wood if the electricity fails. It does. They keep pouring anyway. When the walls go up weeks later, they rise around a line that is already making kanks. Chelyabinsk, November. The Kirov plant's people arrive from Leningrad. Engineers with their notebooks sealed in waxed cloth, fitters with tool chests, families with small suitcases tied with rope. The tractor plant swallows them, like a great machine swallowing a smaller one. Departments are renamed. A new numbering system appears. A lathe operator who turned axle shafts yesterday stands today in front of a turret lathe, cutting breech rings for 122mm guns. The cafeteria adds a second shift at midnight. A notice board reads, "Armored Hull Assembly, 24 days from groundbreaking to first product." It is not a slogan, it is a schedule. Sverdlovsk, Uralmash. They call it Installation Under the Sky. Photographs show machine beds set on wooden blocks in the snow, with only canvas overhead. Men in quilted cotton jackets and women in shawls walk with mittened hands. A master electrician replaces 12 junction boxes with 2 because copper is short. A toolmaker sharpens reamers on a foot pedal grinder when the power drops. Someone draws a giant clock face on a wall. Shift time, meal time, air raid time. It is always time to lift, to bolt, to test. Managing this is an administrative feat as significant as any battle plan. The Evacuation Council writes memoranda that read like orders of battle. Plant X, disassemble in 5 days. 80 rail cars. Destination Sverdlovsk. Receiving plant Uralmash. Power requirement. Provisional housing capacity. The railways reroute trains around bridges taken out by bombs, build temporary sidings in forests, and assign guard detachments to prevent theft and panic. The secret policemen stand in the yards, yes, but so do the trade union men handing out hot tea, and the engineers sent ahead to ready foundations and string power. Everything has a double life. Kuybyshev becomes the reserve capital, the city where foreign embassies move, where a parallel government apparatus waits if Moscow falls. The Hermitage sends its art to Sverdlovsk, while somewhere not far away, a brand new rolling mill is being calibrated with a steel bar brought by hand from a research institute in Moscow. Lenin's body goes to 2 men for safekeeping, and hem-stitched linen is requisitioned for aircraft filters. In the same city, a theater troupe from Kyiv shares a dormitory with a group of foundrymen from Minsk. The evacuees' train tickets are stamped with destinations: Kirov, Ufa, Tashkent, and yet every ticket also reads East, which is both a direction and a promise. None of this is clean. The trains are overcrowded. Rations are thin. Families are split by paperwork and chance. Parents in one city, children in another. Officials debate where to draw the line between workers and dependents. The evacuees' reception in the East is uneven. In some places, locals share. In others, resentment flares. Housing is built out of anything that can be nailed together. Barracks go up faster than walls around machines. Factories staff night schools to teach new workers how to run planers and presses. A teenage girl learns to set clearances on piston rings. A widower learns to align a tailstock by feel. A machinist from the Donbass reads his only letter from home by the light of an acetylene torch and puts it back in his cap. He sleeps in his coat, then goes back to work. The pace of the evacuation follows the pace of the war. When the German army pushes, trains multiply. In October, with the enemy near Moscow, a new series of orders prioritizes government offices and the press. Embassies are told to leave for Kuybyshev. Archives, birth records, land deeds, technical drawings are boxed and labeled. When the lines stabilize in December and frost pins the front in place, the evacuation changes tempo. The last heavy machines roll east. The first new outputs roll west. And then something remarkable happens. The numbers, which plummeted through the fall, begin to climb. By early 1942, in the Urals and Siberia, the first lines hit their rhythm. Sheet steel from Magnitogorsk is hoisted directly into assembly halls by cranes that still smell of pine sap. New shops, designed on the backs of envelopes, prove easier to coordinate than old ones. Clusters of specialized plants, engines here, transmissions there, hulls in a third city, are yoked together by fast trains and standardized drawings. A Euro locomotive hauls a train of turret rings through a snowstorm, and the foundry at the end of the line casts the mating parts to within a millimeter because the gauges match for the first time. This industrial ecosystem is not just a replacement. It is a recreation. The evacuation forced rationalization, fewer variants of a weapon, shared components across models, simpler fixtures, a culture of good enough that still meets battlefield needs. In this new geography, the T-34 becomes simpler to build and easier to repair, not because of theory, but because a bare-bones plant in Nizhny Tagil cannot afford the frills an older factory once considered standard. The KV heavy tank, whose production was disrupted by the siege of Leningrad, is reborn in Chelyabinsk and later reimagined as the IS series. Aircraft factories realign for Yakovlev and Ilyushin designs that can be assembled in cold hangars with improvised jigs. Ball bearings remain scarce and deadly important. Priority lists for bearings read like artillery target maps. When a shipment goes missing, a colonel phones a railway dispatcher at midnight. The train is found on a siding under a drift. The human experience is large enough to fill books and still leave stories untold. A child remembers the smell of hot brake blocks and cabbage soup and her mother's hands cracked from oil and lye. A designer remembers drawing wheels by candlelight while a clerk peeled potatoes beside him. A foreman remembers a night the bombers came and the lights stayed on anyway. He stood on the roof and watched tracer rounds arc over the yard and shouted the next day's schedule to a runner because the loudspeaker was down. People worked until they no longer felt the shape of a week. Their calendar was trains. The Council for Evacuation keeps issuing decrees. Some are mere lines on paper that saved thousands of lives. Others are improvised, contradictory, and frantic. Even within the bureaucracy, there are debates. Was the evacuation too slow in the first weeks? Should more food have been shipped with the machines? Were men held too long at factories that would be overrun? In the aftermath, the official story spoke of inevitability and order. The records that survive show effort, fear, mistakes, improvisation, and stubbornness. They also show that when the front stabilized, the East held. By mid-1942, the transformation was visible from a map. If you draw a line from the Middle Volga through the Urals up to the Ob River Basin and down to Kazakhstan, that shape holds the country's war-making core. Electric power in the Urals doubles compared to before the war. Steel output, cut in half in late 1941, surges back as new furnaces light. In March of 1942, the eastern regions collectively produce as much military equipment as the entire country did in June 1941. In the summer, they exceed it. Italians who call the Eastern Front the War of Factories are not wrong. They just cannot see, from that distance, the chill of a Ural dawn when the hooter sounds and a line of men and women moves toward a gate with frost in their hair. In a history told only by numbers, you might stop here. But there is a quieter coda. When the war pushes west, many evacuees will not go home. Some towns in the Urals will keep their doubled or tripled populations. Design bureaus that began in life as temporary attachments will become permanent. The new complexes will drive post-war heavy industry. The evacuation will leave a demographic map where Russian, Ukrainian, Jewish, Central Asian, and Tatar communities share streets that had never heard their languages before the war. In places where shared life is hard. In others, it is simply life. There is also the question of credit and cost. The evacuation preserved capacity, but at a brutal human price. People died on the trains and in the queues. They died of cold and disease and exhaustion. They died at their machines when the roof fell in during a raid. And yet, the saving of industry saved more lives at the front and in the cities than any single defensive line could have done. It prevented enemy capture of machines that would have turned back against their makers. It enabled the massing of tanks and guns that would be felt at Moscow, at Stalingrad, at Kursk. Finally, there is the matter of memory. As archives opened, historians found the gap between wartime rhetoric and the paper trail. The rhetoric promised perfect control. The paper trail shows a state learning to manage catastrophe in real time. The rhetoric boasted precise totals. The paper trail shows estimates revised in the margins. You will find, if you look closely, lists with the same factory counted twice under different names. You will find numbers that include machinery that never left because the line broke first. You will find trains that left with cargo listed only as miscellaneous metal. None of that negates the achievement. It simply returns it to scale with the people who accomplished it. In the end, if you stand at a rail yard in October 1941 and listen, you can hear the shape of what comes next. A locomotive throttles up. A woman calls a roll of names, her crew. The crane squeals, cables tighten. A lathe rises. A city detaches itself from the earth and slides east. Somewhere ahead, there is a plain where the wind does not stop. There, on frozen ground, under a canvas roof, a line will start, and another, and another. The first machine will hum, the first chips will spiral, and the first hull will be driven out into snow by men and women who slept 3 hours and came back. The evacuation of 1941 is not a footnote. It is the hinge on which a war turns. When the last of those trains arrive in the winter, and the first products leave the new gates, there is no ceremony, only a chalked number on a beam, the sigh of a pressure line, the nod of a foreman. But from those unceremonious hours grows an economy that can fight. Factories that were taken apart like pulpits are reassembled like bridges. People who learned to count shifts by the hooter learn to count victories by months, then weeks, then days. And when, years later, they take down the blackout curtains, they will know what they did. They moved to a country. They proved that industry is not just buildings and machines. It is people and the will to set those machines humming again in the cold.